Hello, good morning, and welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club. This is actually our August selection, and we were supposed to do this meeting in August, but Dave was having some internet problems, and so we're having the show in September instead. But it's good because it's all time is fine. We're fine. My guest today, who I just gave away a little bit, is Dave McKEAN, who's standing right there, or sitting right there, I suppose. Hello, Dave.
Hello.
How are you?
It's nice to be here finally.
Yeah, you, my friend, and the book is RAPTOR. I didn't say that yet. The book is RAPTOR, even though I'm holding it in my hands. You, my friend, are one of the most incredibly talented people that I can think of. You not only do comics, but you do photography, you do music, you've done sets for plays, you're a movie director, you do all of this stuff, and you do it all so well. And so my first question, this is my first question for everybody, but my first question especially for you is why comics? Why do you keep going back to comics? Because it strikes me, maybe I'm wrong, but comics are probably the thing that pay you the least of all of your creative endeavors, of anything that you do. And so what is it? What's that special thing about comics that keeps drawing you back to them?
Well, comics were my first love. I was ill from off school for a couple of days, and my mum bought me some British reprints of Marvel comics, and I completely fell in love with them. And I immediately started drawing my own and writing little stories. And I've always drawn things. I was always the kid in school who was the artist in the class. But when I had stories to tell, the drawings seemed to mean something. They seemed to have a purpose. And that stayed with me all the way through till now. I've never stopped doing comics. There have been times when I've sort of wandered off and tried doing other things and enjoyed doing other things. But I've never stopped doing short stories for myself or comics in strange venues for advertising projects or music projects. Yeah. It remains my first love and the thing that makes good use of what I do.
Yeah. How old were you when your mom brought you those comics?
I was about 8, I think.
8, yeah. That's kind of that magic age for them to stamp themselves on your brain.
Yeah, when you find something that is yours.
Yeah.
And doesn't not part of your parents' world and not part of necessarily your friend's world. It was completely mine.
Yeah. And were you reading British comics before that point at all, or the Beano and those kind of things?
No, not really. I saw the odd one, but they didn't really have much effect. It wasn't until I saw those as I said, they were Marvel reprints that I really liked. Right.
It's so interesting to me because most people who say, oh yeah, like at 8 I fell in love with Marvel Comics, most of them grow up to be superhero guys, right? Like that's what they draw, right? Like they're just going, I love Jack Kirby so much that I want to keep drawing Jack Kirby. But you've gone completely in not the opposite direction, I guess, but I don't really see a lot of that in your art, really.
No, not really. I think it was the medium that I loved, really. Yeah. And so I plowed through them all. There was a period where from Marvel, then I started looking at the stuff that was on the racks in my local newsagents, and they were Charlton comics and odd DC comics, and then Warren magazines, and then I discovered European comics through heavy metal, and then I discovered American independent comics and underground comics. Yeah. And then when I actually started traveling, when I was working professionally, I discovered a world of comics. And every time the world of what comics can be just keeps expanding. Yeah. And I don't really have any feelings of nostalgia for those things that I liked as a kid. And that goes for the films and the television I liked as a kid. I love the medium and what you can do with it rather than individual moments in time.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. You studied art, obviously, in school, yeah?
Yeah, I did. I was broadly on a graphic design course, but it was a fantastically broad course. So I spent the first year doing everything: drawing and painting, photography, printmaking, semiotics, advertising, typography, hot metal type. I mean, literally everything. And then from there, I just liked them all. So I didn't really want to specialize after that. And since this college was really, even though it was broadly under an applied arts banner, it was allowing me to do all these things quite happily. And I had great teachers in several of these disciplines. So I just stayed and I made the most of the place that I knew.
Yeah. Were you doing comics at the time as well? I mean, were you showing your teachers examples of comics, or was that frowned upon as not a serious art?
No, I had a couple of teachers who were very supportive. One was a huge Eagle Comics fan, and so that was his connection to what I was talking about. Mm-hmm. And then I had another lecturer who's still a really good friend of mine, Leo de Freitas, who was a visiting professor. And he liked everything, including comics. He really loved a lot of comics and actually did a lecture on comics when I was there. So I didn't have that. I didn't have everybody to fight, but I certainly had my drawing teacher, I think, was pretty sniffy about the standard of drawing in comics. My illustration teacher, similarly. And to be honest, I couldn't really fight that. You know, that's the great thing about art school. You're surrounded by strong arguments, you know, driven professionals teaching you, as well as all of your fellow students who are hot to trot and also making names for themselves, and arguments and conversations are strong and heated and wonderful for that. And so there was a lot about the comics I was looking at that I couldn't defend. So that didn't make me fall out of love with comics. It just made me want to try and do better comics.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. I've talked to several people who, who've gone to art school here in the States, and and they told me that they've had to like fight their teachers in order to do comics, because it was just looked down upon as just not a valid art form at all. It's good that you had an encounter different than that.
I did some comics there. There were 3 other friends who liked comics, and the 4 of us got together and we wrote, drew, printed, published, and went out to comic marts to sell 4 issues of a comic. They're really dreadful, irredeemably awful. But the experience of doing them was wonderful, and the fact that we did it out of hours, completely on our own. We made it work. We got reviews. We took it to London. That even for the teachers, the tutors who were sniffy about the standard of comics generally, they admired that kind of entrepreneurial spirit, if nothing else.
Yeah, no, very much so. And so is that how you got on the radar of? Well, I mean, I guess the first thing that was professionally published was Violent Cases, or am I wrong about that? Did you have something before then?
The very first thing was published was a short story in Mr. X.
Oh, okay.
And that was a little 3-page Tales from Somnopolis that I drew it, got blue line pages to color, lettered it, wrote it, and completely finished it, and took it along to a London comic convention because I knew the publisher, Bill Marks, I think his name was going to be there, and I just gave it to him. And he liked it and published it. So, and I think it even came with a recommendation from Bill Sinkovich, who I'd met there as well. So that was worth doing. And then my little comics that I published in art school was seen by an editor at Titan Books. Yeah. And he was helping to put together a magazine in London that never happened, called Borderline. This is a story that's been told many times. And Neil Gaiman was one of the writers on that book, and many others were. Mark Buckingham was there, and Disraeli were there, Guy Lawley was there, other people who've gone on to work professionally in comics. But that project never happened. But then I'd met this little crowd of people, London comics people, the Society of Illustrators, and we were off really.
Yeah. I'm actually really impressed that you did a 3-page short on spec for Mr. X, and they just bought it. That's kind of incredible, actually.
Well, they wouldn't ask me to do one, so So yeah, that's what you've got to do. I think when you start off, you know, you've just got to. Luck plays a big element in your progression at the beginning of your career, but you can make luck, you know, balance in your favor by doing work and getting it out there and showing people and trying to make those connections happen.
Yeah, no, very much so. Violent Cases came out at a time that, at least in America, graphic novels were not quite yet a thing. I'm wondering what the environment was in England in 1987 that it was thought to do a longer form story that was an original book, as opposed to serializing it in some fashion.
Well, I think the influence of Escape magazine and that particular stand at the conventions and marks that I would go to in London, that was run by Paul Gravett and Pete Stanbury. I think the influence of that, not necessarily the work that they were publishing, because it was a varied, various people were published there, and I can't say that the work itself was very influential for me. But that independent spirit and that sense that comics can be anything, you can tell stories about anything, and be very British in their spirit. It was a punk kind of attitude, really. It was a feeling that you didn't have to ask anybody's permission. You don't have to work for big companies. You don't have to do work in another voice, in an American accent or something like that. You can tell British stories in your own way, and I couldn't see any reason why you couldn't do longer stories. And if comics are going to have any ambition, any novelistic ambition, then those stories have to have a degree of scale to them. So I think that's why when Neil gave me it's not really a novel, it's a short story, it's a sort of novella. But when he gave me that short story as text, it seemed like it would work perfectly well as a comic. And so that's what we took to Paul. Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't pitched to you originally as a comic. He gave you a short story that you essentially adapted. Is that what
This is a long time ago. But as far as I remember, Neil had written it in a writer's workshop and just had it as a text story and said, I wrote this, what do you think of this? With no particular endpoint in mind. But knowing Neil, I'm sure he had something in mind because he was a hustler. So I think that's where the origin was, and I just thought it would make an interesting story to do as a comic.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it was, and I remember when it came out here in the States. I mean, everybody in my circle, at least, was just kind of thunderstruck by it because it was very different than what we were seeing, and it was, you know, it was funny and it was true, but it was also, well, whatever it is, that was a fantastic book. Well,
the most important thing for me was that it was a general fiction story.
Yeah,
it wasn't a genre story.
Right.
It had a degree of personal commitment to it. It felt like a personal story, almost a family story that Neil was telling.
Yeah.
And it gave me the chance to do the things that I wanted to do. I wanted to look at real people again and how real people look and move and speak. And not these ciphers of people that you were seeing again and again in many of the comics that were around at the time. And I wanted to locate it in real places that I knew and could go and draw. Yeah. So all of those things sort of came together quite neatly in that book, I think.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's narrated by Neil, or at least a Neil equivalent, but it's a very static book in a lot of ways. Was it a challenge for you to sort of both keep your own enthusiasm in drawing it and also to keep the pages interesting because of the sort of the narrative framework? I don't know if that question made sense.
No, I love drawing people, so I love the nuances of body language and expression and all those things. That's what I really love to draw. So that was great. The book is essentially a memory story and the fallacies of memory. Yeah. And so I'd been doing a lot of collage work in art school. And collage seemed to be an interesting way of dealing with that. I was feeling at the time that you tended to remember events in little pieces, a little moment, a texture, an image on the wall, a paint. Maybe there was something on the wall, a bit of a map if it was a local place, or a bit of architecture. The texture of ivy leaves, the smell that gives you, you know, that sense of walking through a graveyard, or you know, all of those sorts of things are triggered by these little things that you can piece together in a collage.
Yeah.
So again, it just seems great to use all the things that I've been trying out in art school in this story.
Yeah. And so, I'm assuming that roughly the same time is when the Vertigo people were coming into London, and, you know, Karen and et cetera, trying to headhunt, because the next thing online obviously is Black Orchid. So where did go ahead.
I was going to say, it wasn't Vertigo at the time. Obviously, it was DC, right, coming in, and it was Jeanette Kahn, Dick Giordano, and Karen Berger. Those are the three people I met with Neil, and I think they were looking for the next tranche of people. They'd had obviously great luck with Alan Moore and Brian Bolland, and, you know, whoever, you know, that first little lot that came through and opened the door for us, particularly Alan, obviously. So they were looking for the next ones to do work for them, and so I took a folio of work, illustration work, and some comics, and obviously Violent Cases that we'd finished. I think pretty much finished. And I had just a wonderful meeting with Dick Giordano, really, because he was a big illustration fan as much as he was a comics creator. First was to take me to the Society of Illustrators in New York. That was wonderful. And I really loved Jeanette. I thought she seemed to be a real independent spirit, and I had a feeling that she wasn't going to last very long at DC, but while she was there, I thought she was absolutely wonderful. And then obviously Karen was the editor, so she was the one who was we were pitching to, and trying to impress.
Yeah. And so Black Orchid, of all characters, had you ever read a Black Orchid story ever before then?
No. I sort of vaguely knew it, but I didn't know it really. Yeah.
Well, Black Orchid was an obscure character, even, you know, on this side of the ocean. So yeah,
Black Orchid was number 20 odd down the list of characters that Neil pitched that afternoon. I think he was scraping the barrel, really.
Right. And so, I mean, what do you remember what your thought was when they came back and they went, Black Orchid, that's the one we want you to do?
Bloody hell, what's that? What have you got me into? I think was my feeling. Yeah, I mean, this was going to be my first job out of art school, first proper job out of art school. So I was hugely grateful for them even entertaining us, let alone giving us a commission. Yeah. So I certainly didn't have anything else lined up. This was my chance to get some actual serious work. So I was fantastically grateful for that. Yeah. So I think from my point of view, it was just trying to, you know, look at it and see what we could do with it. And I think the fact that I thought there could be an ecological side to the story was important. I thought that might be interesting. I don't know. It really took Neil to go away and write something before I could have any opinion on it, really.
Sure. Were you at all nervous about the notion of doing 150, 160 pages, whatever it ended up being, and that it was fully painted? Because that seems a little daunting to me.
It was a little daunting. That was less daunting at the time. I seem to, you know, I'd done Violent Cases, and that had been, 10 times longer than anything else I'd ever done was a story. So to scale it up by 3 didn't seem to be so daunting. Right. The daunting thing was dealing with these characters. You know, by then I'd long since lost any interest in those kinds of characters.
Yeah.
So I was just hoping I could find some way of doing it that I could do, because I don't think these things should be done by somebody who is desperately trying not to do that. You know, if you're going to do a Superman story, you should really love something about that character and want to explore that character. You shouldn't be, you know, cynically saying, I really can't stand this stuff, but I'll do it. I'll turn it into something really dark and awful because I don't like. I think that's a miserable way forward. I think you should really like these characters, and I really didn't. So I had to try and find something about the story, something about them that I could tackle. I could make my own, you know.
Yeah. Painted comics were still, I mean, it wasn't new. There had been painted comics at that point. But I'm wondering about the challenge of doing that while you're in the UK. Is it harder was it harder to get the art back and forth, to get the feedback? Because this was largely pre-internet. I don't know if you were scanning pages or not, or if you were just mailing them. Like, can you talk about the mechanical part of it? Because a lot of this stuff is lost, you know, like what the transitions, you know.
So this is completely pre-computer, pre-internet. I bought a computer in 1993, and I did Black Orchid in 1987, 88, 87, 88. So I was doing physical artwork. I didn't use their boards. I just bought the size of boards I wanted to use, because to paint them, I felt I needed a slightly bigger board. And I wanted a certain kind of paper and something with a nice texture to it. And I was not scanning my own work. I did work with a photography studio to scan boards. So if I did a cover on a board, and at the time I was doing covers for Hellblazer and then covers for Sandman, and I was doing those on, well, you know, huge pieces of wood sometimes. So I was scanning those. I was photographing those at a local studio. But the pages, I seem to remember, I just sent them. I just sent them in bundles of pages. Yeah. And they scanned them.
Were you? So, what was the sort of the editorial feedback? Were you would you give them pencil roughs first for them to approve, or were you just going straight to paint?
No, I just went straight to paint.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the kind of arrogance of ignorance, really. Having never done it before and not knowing what the rules are and not knowing what's usual. Yeah. I just did what I'd done on Violent Cases. I thumbnailed it out in my sketchbooks, and then painted it. Obviously, I sent them a few pages at the very beginning. I think I sent them. I can't remember. Maybe 4 pages to start with, to say, okay, this is the kind of thing I'm planning. Are you okay with this? Both aesthetically and technically, are you okay with this? And I got, you know, general thumbs up, so I just carried on.
Yeah, and so, and did you end up mailing them the physical pages, or was it just the photographs?
It's, you know, it sounds. I find it hard to believe that I mailed all the pages, but I think I did. I can't think of any other way of doing it, because I didn't scan them. I certainly didn't photograph them all. That's ridiculous. Yeah. And it did become that. I did have issues doing Arkham Asylum because some of those pages, those spreads, were done on boards, and so we had to work out a compromise. And I did photograph some of those spreads. I think there were about 10 of them. In England, and sent them the very high-res 10x8 transparencies. Yeah. Not scans, 10x8 transparencies. Right. But the Black Orchid pages, I'm sure I just sent them all in the post, or sent them all by FedEx.
Right. That's crazy when you think about it, right?
Yeah, but I guess that's how all artwork moved around then.
Yeah, no, I know, but I mean, today we're like, whoa, what? You're sending like, you know, giant boxes of you know, boards that are all painted, and anything could happen to them, you know.
It is hard to believe. Yeah. And I even went through a transitional phase with the computer, because I was an early user of computers,
Yeah.
So and the standard device for storage at that point was called a SideQuest cartridge. It was 44 megs or 88 meg SideQuest cartridge, about that big.
Yeah.
And so you could get barely anything on it. But I'd save pages and things onto that and send those by FedEx.
Right.
So, you know, there's still no internet. There's still no way of doing this easily and digitally.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
things are real different now, though.
things, you know, most things in the world feel like they've gone backwards, but this has definitely gone forwards. This has been a big improvement.
Yeah. That's great. I want to talk about the Sandman covers just for a minute, because those were giant structural collages and shelves and things, and I remember you telling me at one point that they were, like, you know, really huge.
Well, some were. I mean, that's number one.
Yeah.
So yes, that was huge. The first 8 were huge. They were bigger than I can explain on the screen.
Right.
And that was because I was using things like pieces of doors and big objects.
Yeah.
And, you know, and so the scale of it, I just needed, and there was no Photoshop compositing at this point. So the scale of it had to be big. But some of them are small, you know, the ones following, these little ones.
Yeah.
That's the same size as printed, I think.
Oh, okay.
Because the scale of these was really small. I was using butterfly wings and pins and tiny little skulls.
Yeah.
And so I made these very, very small collage pieces and photographed them. And so you'd see the texture of all of those little things. So, and they kept on going. You know, they're whatever size I need to do to get across the piece, really.
Yeah. Well, were you reading the scripts in advance and then building the cover around an early, or you weren't seeing pages from the actual book at that point, right? You were early enough in the production?
It changed through the run of Sandman. Okay. So at the beginning, I was seeing everything. I was seeing pages. I was seeing thorough outlines. I was able to read scripts if I wanted to. Yeah. And then it started to get behind. So so then there might be the odd script, but more likely just an outline, and I wasn't seeing any pages. Maybe I knew who was drawing it, but and then 3/4 of the way through the run, all advanced information disappeared, and it became a quick grabbed conversation on the phone with Neil about what maybe he might be thinking about including. And I would just respond to that. And it's amazing how some of them synced up just from pure instinct, really. Yeah. Yeah. Those Sandman covers, they're just so remarkable. I still remember just our reactions to them as they came out. And just the notion that you would build a giant shelf and put objects on it and photograph that. I mean, that seems crazy to me in a way. The thing is, what I was hoping to do was make covers that would reach an audience who were buying novels and buying albums and seeing films. So it was much more related to the aesthetic of album covers and really good book design and things like that. It wasn't really, obviously it wasn't looking back at what else was on the comic book shelves. The strangest one was that one. Yeah. Can I show you that one? Yeah. Which is, a music stand, a fish, an etching about madness, and a hand-drawn rainbow. Yeah. And all of those elements showed up in the final comic. And Neil hadn't seen this cover at the time. So God knows where that came from. Yeah. That was pure synchronicity. I guess that's a lot of art, is that pure synchronicity. And certainly, if the goal was to make it look more like things that would attract a normal human being off the street, it worked, right? I mean, this is the thing, that it actually worked. Sandman
as you know, became sort of a phenomena at the moment. We were selling to what we call civilians over here. The people who don't normally read comics. We were suddenly getting these audiences of people who were like, I want to read this comic. Well, it really worked, and I think that the covers had so much to do with it.
I think initially they did. I think obviously when people started to pick up the comics, then they got into the story and they were following Neil's script. But I think it's the shop window, isn't it? It's the first thing that grabs your attention. And my experience of, for example, falling in love with Vaughan Oliver's design for at Envelope 23 for the 4AD albums, I would just buy those albums. I didn't. Sometimes I really hated the music. Sometimes I liked the music. But I would just buy those albums. Same with ECM. I would just buy those albums.
Yeah.
At the time I was in art school, the editor, the art director at Picador Books was Gary Day Ellison, and he used to commission the cream of British and American illustrators to do those book covers. And because of those covers, I bought them because they just looked so intriguing and beautiful, and that was a world I wanted to explore. And through that, I discovered all of those authors, Hunter Thompson, Ian McKEAN, Salman Rushdie, all of these people. And I wouldn't have read them if I hadn't been for those covers. So that was the lesson I took, really. And that's what I wanted to apply to the Sandman. I thought our ambition, Neil's ambition, and mine for the comics medium was to reach out into the real world and talk to those people. And you have to talk to them in a language that is interesting and intriguing for them.
Yeah. And the fact that you succeeded at that, I think is just, kind of a testament to that.
Yeah, it worked.
Yeah, it worked. On more recent Sandman stuff, they haven't led with your covers, which I thought was an interesting choice on DC's part. Did they approach you to?
Do you mean the most recent?
Yeah.
Yeah. No. I think I let it be known I was done, really.
Okay. Okay.
I got into a sort of ongoing wrangle, really, with Vertigo towards the end of my days there at Vertigo. They kept on reissuing Sandman in ever more ludicrous formats. I mean, how many times have those things been reprinted now?
A lot. Yeah.
And I think there's some sense in doing a collection of book covers for the book market, and there is some sense of making maybe a particularly lavish one with notes and all that. You can make arguments for that, but endlessly screwing money out of fans for endless reprints of the same material, I found really awful. And I kept on having that conversation with my editors there, and so I would do some of them, but they kept on asking for more, and I would refuse. And so there was a line of covers. I think Neil insisted they use my old images for the covers, but the design was not by me. And so for the 30th anniversary lot, I agreed to do sort of one final pass.
Yeah. And
I hoped, really, that between those and every other bloody cover I've done, which there must be 4 of each book by now, they would have enough to be able to keep on rotation and have those be the covers of Sandman. Right. But apparently that's not the case. Yeah. So never mind. I have to move on at some point, and so I think I'm done.
Yeah. No, that's completely, absolutely fair. Let's talk for a second about Arkham.
Okay.
Arkham Asylum was it was rare to get a Batman comic that was painted like that. And it went on at the time to be, I guess, the best-selling original graphic novel at that moment. You said that you didn't really have that much of affinity for superhero books. Did you feel any particular weight? Or was this just a Batman story? Do you know what I mean? Like, because DC really promoted it like a prestige thing. Is that how you thought about it, or was it just a job?
Again, this is a long, long time ago,
Sure.
and I'm trying to remember. I don't remember any feeling of pressure or weight of responsibility of handling this sacred character. I don't think I felt any of that. I think very much at the time we had a sort of punk spirit of, yeah, we'll just do it. And it was the third book that I've been working on, and I was developing my own kind of feeling of how comics could be done, and this was just the third book in the line. And so again, I was looking for things that I could make work for me. And so being able to sit down with Grant Morrison over lunch and talk about what the possibilities could be and how maybe we could turn it into something a bit different, and something that touches the things that we both were really enjoying at the time. I'd really loved Jan Schwankmayer's films, and I know he did as well. He loved Dennis Potter's writing and was inspired by that, and I loved Dennis Potter. And so all of these things really had nothing to do with Batman or the previous incarnations of the character. So how can we turn this character into something more mysterious, mythic, less pedantically a bloke in a suit, and more a kind of tarot figure, somebody that's more symbolic and dreamlike, and the story was structured like a sort of Alice in Wonderland story anyway. Yeah. So we had that to fall back on. It was kind of a dream story anyway. So I felt no worries at all about suggesting all these things to Grant, and he was well up for it. So then we just had to talk to DC about it, and I did a few samples. I think I did a sample page or two, and talked to them about what we planned. And it was a very specific time at DC where they were really happy to just try these things, because they had so much success with allowing creators their head, and allowing them to just try new tacks, new ways of looking at things. I think they felt that they didn't have much to lose and possibly everything to gain. Yeah, it was a golden moment, really. It was a golden few years. And my little gang that I knew at the time, these sort of London-based comics people, were really up for making the most of that moment, because you know that it's going to go. So you have to just get as much work done as you can. Yeah.
Do you feel like you achieved your goals in terms of like what you wanted out of the story, or at the end of the day, was it just Batman?
It's really hard to say on that, really, because there were things about it I liked. I got to the end of Black Orchid and I was really disappointed with it, and I was really disappointed with myself for doing it. And so I was a bit wary about doing another book with these characters in, but this seemed like I could push the drawing and push the imagery much more and make it much more dreamlike and expressionistic. And so those were the things that excited me about it. And those were the things in the end, those elements, I think they were in advance. I was happy with those things at the time. Yeah. Again, I got to the end of it and felt there's a fair degree of ambition here in both Grant's writing and the themes that he wants to write about, and what I was trying to draw. It still felt like an art school project to me, but what I was trying to draw. But I couldn't get away from the fact that at the foundation there was a bloke in a suit. And so what it did for me really was absolutely confirm that was not the ladder I wanted to be on. Right. But having had this wonderful 2-3 years, and hugely grateful of the work and being paid to do the work. And a great time meeting the folks at DC, working with Grant, working with Neil. I got so much out of it. There's no way I could have any regrets about it. But all it did was it just confirmed that I'm just not the right person to do this kind of thing. Sure.
Well, and then your next couple of books, Signal and Noise, Mr. Punch, those seem much more like work that you feel a little more connected to, I guess.
Yeah, completely. I thought Mr. Punch was probably the best of the books I did with Neil.
Yeah.
And I thought, and Signal to Noise was largely mine. I mean, that was a commission from the Face magazine, and so I wanted to do something inspired by Eisenstein, this sort of director who knew that he would die at a certain age and did, and how that affects your choices in life.
Yeah.
So I brought all that to it, and then and Neil wanted to do something set 1,000 years ago as a key to understanding events as we headed towards the year 2000, and those two elements seemed to come together quite well.
Yeah.
And so that was a much more personal project for me.
Yeah, yeah, and they're beautiful too. It's constantly surprising to me how those books drop in and out of print in America. I would have thought that all of these things would have stayed in print forever because they're just so good. Well,
yeah, I mean, but becoming core stock in a bookshop these days is really tough. So they get. I'm just grateful that they do get reprinted and they do get another few years of life, and then I mean that's all you can be grateful for these days. It's very hard to be published.
Yeah, I mean, I would particularly hope that when you've got the new book, that the publishers would then go, "Hey, let's bring all this backlist back into print." You would think, but
I can't take these things for granted.
Yeah. Before we get to the really major work, I'm super curious about you did a Voodoo Lounge comic with the Rolling Stones, and so. What was that? I guess my question is what was that like? Did someone call you up and go, "Yeah, I'm representing the Rolling Stones," and did you think "Yeah, sure you are, buddy," or do you know what I mean?
No, I think it came through the publisher.
Okay.
There was a guy called Mike Warlaw, I think his name was. I haven't thought about him for a long time, and he'd done some deal with Marvel, I think it must have been. To do some music-related projects, and so I'm pretty sure that Alice Cooper thing that I did the covers for that Neil wrote was one of them.
Yeah. And
then the Rolling Stones came up, and he just said, what do you think about doing a comic based on their new album? They were interested in doing that, and I was doing a lot of music industry stuff at the time. That's why it didn't faze me.
Okay.
I was doing lots of album covers. After doing Arkham Asylum was like a little portfolio that landed on every art director's desk.
Right.
So all of a sudden, I got lots of album covers to do. And so the idea of doing a project for the Rolling Stones was great. And I didn't meet them. All I did was there was a phone conversation and some email toings and froings, and I sent them some work so that they would trust me. That's all. I think when you get to be a Rolling Stone, all you want is just not to be made to look stupid by your collaborators. So as soon as they trust you, they're hands off. They're happy to let you do your thing. Mm-hmm. So they were a breeze.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Is that generally true with most musicians as well? That you're not really having contact with the musician, working with an art director instead, or are there examples where they're like, we really want to get your involvement in this for the cover?
No, I've had every conceivable kind of collaboration. There are musicians like Bill Bruford and Ian Bellamy Frontline Assembly that I've worked with now for 15 years, longer, 20 years. Mm-hmm. And I know them, they're friends, and we talk directly. And some of them, Bill Bruford just lets me do whatever I want. He's happy to just give me a title, and he always appears to be delighted with whatever I do, which is a very nice client to have. Yeah. Others come with ideas, or it's a little more of a collaborative thing. Frontline Assembly have rejected a couple of the covers that I've done, but because we've got such a good relationship and it's such an ongoing thing, I don't mind. I'll use them for something else and I'll do another one instead. Yeah. So it's been I've done covers for a couple of bands who have turned out to be complete pains in the neck.
Right.
Usually I do their first album cover and they're so grateful to get a deal, they're happy. But when it sells well, the second album, they suddenly become prima donnas and they want 20 roughs of everything, and to endlessly mess you around because they think that's what it is to be a rock star.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of them have gone kind of sour that way, but most of the people I've worked with have been great, and most of them. Bill is an exception, actually. Most of them are interested in what goes on their covers and the way that they're presented. And not that Bill isn't, but he's very hands-off.
No, I understand.
So it's great to get the inside track on how the particular artist was, what this music means to them, what it's about, and to be able to try and do justice to all the work that they put into the music.
Yeah, yeah. So on that sort of that musical theme, let's talk about Cages for a little while. I mean, I think it's a masterpiece, and it's very much an intersection of comics and musics. Its scope is ambitious. It's nearly 500 pages long. It's the only time I've ever really seen music rendered in comics that wasn't, I don't know, twee maybe. Talk about it for a minute.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was my first baby. It was, before working at DC, I'd always written my own stories. So it was actually a strange little diversion to start working with writers and have to illustrate their worlds. And so having done that a little bit, I was very keen to get back to what I started doing, which was writing and illustrating my own books. Yeah. All of the things that I wanted to do at the time were, again, looking at the way real people talk and speak and the body language and the way that they express themselves. I wanted to get that humanness into comics. I got a bit fed up with painted comics, and mostly because of the sheer time it takes, not just to do them, but to read them. And I mean, look and read the image. It felt very lugubrious and slow, the storytelling. It felt like you lurched from one thick, fully rendered image to the next thick one. And what I was after was the sense of people talking and moving and speaking, and something much lighter, something more like handwriting. Yeah. Something much, much looser and more gestural. So I was very inspired by a lot of the comics artists I was seeing at the time. It's pretty obvious that I liked Jose Munoz at the time. You'll see his influence in some of the drawing, several others, because they seem to have a lightness of touch with their storytelling. I like that. I wanted to do something about music. I love jazz. I love music generally, but I love jazz. And I wanted to see if it was possible to bring that flavor of improvisation or looseness or something about a musicality to a comic, even though it has no sound, no motion. I mean, I thought that was a really interesting challenge, and I didn't. You're right. I didn't want to do it in a expository, pedantic, twee way. Yeah. I wanted to find a way of melding it with the stories of the people that were there and how the two could reflect off each other. I wanted to do something about belief, what we believe, why we believe in things, if we believe in things, and what makes us carry on. And so for me, my God, I'm not a religious person. My God is creativity. So I wanted it to be about creativity and what that struggle is. I wanted it to be about storytelling. Yeah. Yes, the other big important thing in my life is storytelling. Almost everything I do is related to story in some way. Even the album covers that I do, I tend to make little worlds for that particular release and thread images through that have some sort of narrative quality to them. I think in story, and that's interesting to me. why a story is so important to the way that we think about ourselves and pass our culture between us and all those sorts of questions.
Yeah.
So those were all the things that I was, working with in my notes in my sketchbooks.
Yeah.
And I had notes for a bunch of little stories. And very soon it seemed obvious that actually they all seemed to be taking place in a similar kind of city place. Right. They all seemed to be characters who could easily know each other or relate to each other. And maybe they do. Maybe they just all live together in the same apartment block.
Yeah.
And so that's how it became. And you can see there's a sense in Cages of the short stories that was the book's origin.
Right.
But I hopefully they're threaded through in a way that makes it a.
No, I think they very much do. Yeah.
Good.
I think they very much do. Because of the ambitious nature of it, did it take you longer to be able to execute what your vision was than the painted stuff, right? Because the painted stuff, you've got to put a lot of work into the paint and how the paint is on the page. But with the line work, right, it's all gesture and it's all capturing motion, I guess. What's the difference in working in? They're not two different mediums, but they kind of are in a way. Or am I insane?
No, in a way, they're exactly the same as almost all creative endeavor is. You're looking at the problem that you've got to solve, the message that you've got to put across, the atmosphere of the story, whatever problem you've got to solve, and you just try and come up with the very best way of doing that and the most effective way of doing that. So in a way that they're similar. The difference really is that Cages for me was all about the storytelling, and it wasn't until I wrote that book that I realized quite how important those words are, and the fact that I just had to redraw things to get them right, to express those words. And it's not that I hadn't done that with the books with Neil and Grant, but I would say I was probably in pursuit of the pretty picture more with those books, rather than really trying to make sure storytelling was right with Cages.
And so your creative process on a book where you're doing all of the work, do you write out full scripts? Do you write sort of synopsis? Do you start with sketches? Like, where do you, when you have a blank page in front of you, where do you begin?
Well, I keep notebooks all the time. So my notebooks are mostly are largely full of story ideas, notes about things, image ideas. And what generally happens is a few of them start to coalesce into one thing. And that one thing lives in my sketchbook for quite a while. And if it keeps nagging at me and doesn't go away and I don't go back to it and think, no, actually, it's not very good. It just keeps on nagging me. Then those tend to be the things that I'll pursue. Yeah. And I just have to put them somewhere. I have to find a story or a venue for them somewhere. And so those are the slowly over the years. Those are the stories that I've been finding places for in books, in films, in short films, in musical projects, in theatre projects, and now again back in longer comics.
And so when you're actually beginning the execution, like you've decided, okay, so this is a strong enough idea that I can actually do a story with it. Again, are you beginning with words for yourself when you're starting to lock it down, right? Or the pictures, or where does it start with you?
Start with all sorts of fragments, really. Yeah. They're little bits of story, they're character ideas, they're some images, settings, music often. If I find a story or a setting or a theme or some idea that I really like, if I can find a soundtrack for it that really crystallizes the mood, that really helps. So it starts in fragments and it slowly pulls together. And I know that it's going to be, I know that the story is going to work when I have what I feel is the ending.
Yeah.
And then the next stage is the beginning. And then the next stage, the third stage for me, is some narrative dogleg in the middle that means it's an actual story, not just sort of points on a map. If a shape starts to develop in the story that's interesting to me and isn't just a usual kind of story shape that I've seen a million times before, there's something about it that I think, that's unusual, and I think I could make something quite personal out of that.
Yeah.
Then that's when I'll pursue it.
Yeah. And so when you're pitching something like Cages, what kind of a document are you putting together for a prospective publisher, or were you even in that case? Well,
I have been astonishingly lucky with many of my projects. I've been in the with Cages. I met Kevin Eastman and some of the other people involved with Tundra, and Steve Bissett I knew, and some of those other guys. Yeah. And they were, Kevin liked my work, and so he was keen for me to do something. So I think he probably would have done almost anything.
Okay.
And so Cages was the book I was deep in the middle of developing at that point. I did have another couple of things kicking around, and for one reason or other, they just sort of fell by the wayside, and Cages was the one. And I think all I said was, I want to do something that is novelistic and in ambition, so it's going to be quite long. Yeah. And it would be nice if it was released in sections in magazines and then collected together as a novel. Partly so it's not so daunting of doing the whole book in one bite.
Sure.
But also so that it could come out and I could actually see how people are reading it.
Yeah.
And the way people read it actually had an impact on the way I wrote parts of it. Because
how do you mean that?
Well, number one came out. Well, there's an example. That's the other thing. It took me too long to do it. So it took a matter of years to do it. It should have been done in a year, really, but it took a few years to do. But what that meant was, after, for example, the second issue came out, maybe the third issue even, I started getting letters from people with a particular tone. And I'd never got letters before. Neil got letters because he's a writer. I'm an artist. Right. I presumably am not able to read letters. But I started to get letters from people. And there was a particular tone that I'd noticed, which was, oh, yeah, okay, I see what you're doing here. Yeah, I get it. I was really kind of dismissive. Yeah, I've got it. No, I know what it is now. And I didn't really like that tone. And so I wrote in the fourth issue, I think it's the fourth one, there's a sequence in it that I had a vague idea of what I was going to do, but I wrote it, and it has it's completely inexplicable. It had no sense of being there. And that was in part 4. And then it completely shut down those letters. I didn't get anybody saying they knew what Cages was now. Right. And then I knew that I was going to go back to that sequence in, I think, number 8 or 9, and for it to have something to do with the denouement of one character's story. Yeah. So I knew that it would make sense in the end, but at that point, it was a mystery. Yeah. And and there were a few times, that was the most extreme one, but there were a few times when people who had read it and talked to me about it and what they were taking from it. And it was interesting. I didn't quite expect that. So that's going to colour just a little bit the way I shape the rest of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's, I mean, I think one of the greatest things about comics is that audience feedback, that audience participation. I always say, like, in terms of reading comics are really the only medium that I think of that it's normal for the reader to go back in the work, in the middle of the work, right? Like you're reading a comic and, wait, let me go back 3 pages and look at that again. That doesn't usually happen with prose. That doesn't usually happen. You can't do it with movies or plays because those are, limited by time, the linearity of time, right? But time in comics is what the audience brings to it. as much as what the author's intention is.
That is absolutely one of the, defining features of comics, and one of the reasons why I love that medium. There are so many ways in which comics invite you as a reader to be creative yourself. Mm-hmm. And so if you're bright about it, if you're intelligent in the way you set up the comic and tell the story, yes, you can put seeds that are planted early on, that are picked up later on, that you have to go back to understand properly. Yeah. And the book is this big lump of time is open in front of you, and you can go forward and back and explore it.
Yeah. And so you said that that Cage's took you longer than you wanted, you thought it would.
Yeah.
Is that because of you figuring out things about the storytelling, or was it because you had other work that was demanding it get done?
It's because I had a lot of other work to do as well, that I really wanted to do, and I didn't want to turn it down and spend a solid year only doing Cages.
Right.
And the other problem was I didn't take an advance for the book. So I was happy to take my good solid 50% percentage of sales, but I didn't want to take an advance because, I don't know, I think at the time I just didn't want that. I didn't want that pressure. I wanted to really be able to go my own way with it, and if that meant spending, 3 or 4 months on an issue rather than one, well, that's the way I wanted it to go. It was very frustrating, I think, for the audience that was picking it up at the time, and it was frustrating for me. I just wanted to get it done as well. But about trying to balance all those factors in my life at that time, because I had a very complicated life at that time. I'm afraid that's the way it panned out.
Yeah. This actually fascinates me because one of the things about Tundra, and I'll just sort of give, this is just sort of mild history lesson for people reading at home or watching at home. Tundra was Kevin Eastman, who was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It was his attempt to try and give back to comics, to let creators be creators, and he would give people advances. He would give people enormous advances for comic ideas, and probably half of them or 3/4 of them took the money and fucked off, right? Like they didn't actually end up doing the work. So it's actually really fascinating to me that you didn't take the money, and it almost makes it sound to me like it made you do the work, right? If you see what I'm saying.
Yeah, there's an element of that, and also I saw Tundra as an absolutely golden opportunity for an umbrella title for all of these different creatives with their own labels to come together and have the clout and the economy of scale of a big publisher, but be comprised of all of us independents with our own labels and our own books, and with a backer who was, financially flush and full of enthusiasm. And you're right, it came out of a good place.
Yeah.
And I felt, I really want this to work, and I really want this to still be here in 10, 20 years' time. And by demanding some ludicrous advance and ripping off Kevin and not doing the work, that's not the way that's going to happen.
Yeah,
I really felt that this was too good a chance to abuse, but unfortunately, that's not what panned out in the end, as we all know.
Yeah, no, I mean, it feels like that it was essentially comics' version of the Beatles' Apple Core, where they had good intentions, they wanted to put things out, and then people took advantage of it. I mean, maybe not intentionally taking advantage of it, but Cages is one of the rare books that actually finished at Tundra. There's not a lot of stuff that ended up coming out of Tundra, despite its wonderful origins and motivations, and the amount of money that Kevin put into it. I always think of Tundra when I think of that saying, how do you make a small fortune in comics? To start off with a large one.
Exactly.
And that was kind of that perfect example of all the best intentions in the world, and then it just kind of all dribbled away.
Yes, I mean, I think there were a lot of reasons why that happened, and I think a lot of the people involved were the reasons. I mean, I really feel it was just a terrible missed opportunity, and it made me feel very, very low when all of that collapsed. And when Tundra UK opened, that was absolutely the final straw. It was such an abuse of one man's money. I thought this is going to die next year, and sure enough, it did.
But at the end of the day, you own all your work from that, and you can, which is great. Is that a book that we're going to be able to get back into print soon? Because it's not in print now, and it drives
Is
me
it
nuts.
not in print? Oh well, I mean, Dark Horse have been very good about keeping it in, going back to press. I've done, I don't know how, 3, 4 editions now with Dark Horse. I know before that there was an NBM one, before that there was Kitchen Sink. But Dark Horse has been really good about keeping it in print. Maybe I doubt that they keep their books constantly in print. But at key moments, they will go back to press and reprint. So I'm sure Cages there will be another edition, but there are plenty of copies out there if you want one.
Yeah, I suppose. I'd love to keep selling it right now.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah. Let me ask you super briefly about Celluloid, piece of erotica. What was your motivation to do that?
Wow. Well, I think isn't it strange that most comics are about violence? And I think, I don't know about you, but there's very little violence in my life. And whenever I've come across it, I wished I hadn't.
Yeah.
Whereas there's quite a lot of sex generally going on. And it's quite nice, isn't it? So why is there this huge disparity between the two? And why can't we, if this is a mature medium, like every other medium, why can't we have books that explore that side of very human nature?
Yeah.
And so I tried to do that in Cages as well. I mean, and in fact, looking at the two now, honestly, I probably think that the rooftop scene at the end of Cages was probably a nicer, better, more, clear-eyed way of saying we are sexual beings. This is what happens, than my great long phantasmagoric celluloid book. But I fancied doing something like that, and I'd made notes for it. And then it coincided with doing an erotic story for a French publisher, for Delcourt, I think it is, Delcourt. And of course it is. And so just while we were doing that, and while I was talking to them, and they had this label, and I said, I've always fancied doing something like that. Oh, do it. So there we go. I had a venue, so I couldn't put it off any longer.
Very good.
I thoroughly enjoyed doing it, I can tell you. Yeah.
So at some point in here, you start doing films. There's Mirror Mask. There's a number of things in there. Talk maybe about the difference in working in a medium like film, where you need scores of people, versus comics, where it's really just you and one other collaborator, maybe.
I mean, that's one of the big differences. And I started making short films. So that's the short film collection that came out. And I did 2 short films with a tiny crew, basically 4 people, and 1 or 2 actors. There's 2 actors in each one. And that was at a scale that I could keep my hands around it. But even there, you start to see that there are technical things going on that are beyond me, and I'm going to have to learn how to do this. And I'm beholden to other people's knowledge. so there's a degree of collaboration already. But it was a nice scale, and I'm happy with those 2 short films. I mean, they're rough and ready, but I like them. And then on making Mirror Mask, that was a whole other scale and a whole other degree of compromise.
Yeah.
Marshall Brickman always used to say on a film, a truck full of fresh compromises pulls up every morning. Mm-hmm. And that was the case working on that film. It was also a compromise for me on the subject of the film. It was an opportunity given. Do you want to do this kind of film for this amount of money? You have a few weeks to come up with an outline or a script, first draft script. Do you want to take that little chance? So of course we took the little chance. It's a nice thing to go for. But making the film was really tough.
Yeah. And
because the budget was really tiny and the technology was bleeding edge for what we could do with that kind of money. And it was the first time I'd worked with a crew and the first time I'd really worked with actors. And what I discovered was I really love working with actors. I love the collaboration. But on Mirror Mask, I thought my job was, as director, to have answers for everything. And if they ask me why they're standing in a big blue space pointing at something, they want to know what they're pointing at and where they're standing. So I storyboarded the whole thing so that I could show them exactly what was going on. What came out of that was that actors actually don't want to be treated like puppets and clothes horses. They want to work with you on developing their character and the scene and the way it goes. And not all of them, but many do. Mm-hmm. And so in the end, I think I had some rather frustrated actors and I didn't get the best out of them. Whereas on my next film, which is this one, Luna. I did not storyboard any of it. I didn't plan any of the scenes. I'd written it, obviously. But I just arrived at the set with them in the morning and we just looked at the things that we had to do. And I talked to them about how they wanted to approach it and where they would start. If they wanted to rewrite bits of it or put things in their own words, it's fine. And we just found our way through the scenes in a much more collaborative way. And it was a much more happy film to make. So that was my lesson, really. If you're in a compromised medium, a medium of compromise, you have to make it work for you. You have to make the most of those compromises. You have to make the most of collaboration as a whole and not fight it. If you try and fight it, everybody will be miserable. Yeah,
I wonder. I don't know a lot about filmmaking, but it strikes me that a lot of filmmaking is getting the shot right, which means getting the sound and the lighting right, which means getting the framing right, which means in most productions it's a lot of pre-planning and a lot of pre-visualization and a lot of thinking things out ahead of time. Is it because there's a lot of money at stake as well, right? And a lot of people's time. And if you don't actually get the right footage, then you're kind of screwed, right? So
I
don't know what my so is after that, but so ...
Well, the so ... is I'm really only interested in making films on this kind of scale. I think when you get to the bazillions of dollars and these hugely pre-visualized films, I mean, it's kind of filmmaking by an industry and a technical. It's a technical computer challenge, and the amount of human connection in there just gets reduced. I'm just not interested in that kind of filmmaking. I don't really like watching them, and certainly don't want to spend my life any time making them. Yeah. So what I loved about film was the chance to work with sound and music, my big love. The chance to work with actors and what you get from very particular, demanding profession. They're an extraordinary bunch of people. Certainly the actors that I've met, and I've got a lot from them. And I think the fact that they have to be so naked, you know, in their professional lives, makes for a very particular kind of person. And I've really enjoyed working with them, and I've got a lot from them. But the whole technical side, I really want to keep to a minimum. And a lot of it I'm covering. I know the images I want. I know the compositions I want. I know the kind of lighting I like. I know the kind of cutting I like. I know that I want it to have a flavor of my visual style, my illustrative style. So there will be something of that there. So all of those things, I'm covered. Yes, I'm working with the director of photography, but very closely they know what I like, and we can just do that. I'm very happy walking into a room and just turning lights off if I don't want all those lights on. And the DPs that I've worked on know I'll do that, so they don't take offence, you know. So it's on a very personal scale. It's on a very, very small personal level, and that's the kind of filmmaking I can sort of get my hands around.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense to me. When you're doing things like plays, where you're designing a set, how do you, because again, you have to kind of subvert what you want, right, to what the director wants. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, the theatrical work I've done has been like a few different things. I've done a bit of design, but actually it's been other things. I started working with WildWorks, which was an astounding theatre company in Cornwall, on this project, which was called The Passion of Port Talbot, and this is my film of it, called The Gospel of Us. It's Michael Sheen's project.
Yeah.
And the man in charge was Bill Mitchell, and he's become the most important, influential person in the second half of my life, really. He has a very particular way of working, a very loose improvisational way of working. All of his work was about a sense of place. He does outdoor environmental theatre. He works with local communities. It's about getting to know the place and the people that live and work there. It's about getting to know the nature that's there, the weather, the myths and stories of the place. And he confects these extraordinary theatrical events around all of these things. And so on The Gospel, I was there to make the film. So I came in late on that one, but I made the film. And then on Wolf's Child, I wrote Wolf's Child. So I was there at the script stage. And then throughout the whole development, actually the whole development before the script stage, when it was just a place and a notion and a bit of this and a bit of a Greek myth and something else, and lots of improvisation, and then writing it, and then working with them as they were developing it, and then shooting it as a film. So a very, very thorough sort of involvement with that one.
Yeah.
But the thing that I got out of Bill's way of working is just being alive to the development process, constantly changing, and whenever something comes along, grabbing it. And you know, the final thing is not set in stone at the beginning of the process. We know what we're going to do. It's constantly changing right up until the first performance and beyond. So it's very scary because you have to trust that it will work. Yeah. But it mostly works. And when you have a bit of experience doing it, you can kind of force it and it does work. And what you get out of it is something that's absolutely alive. Yeah. It's not been killed at or set in stone at the very start of the process. Right. It's a living, breathing thing. And I've tried to bring that process to all of the things I've done recently, including Black Dog and Raptor.
Yeah. I guess I don't understand how you can hold all these things in your head, these different forms of art, these different ways of storytelling. Because it feels to me like, as not an artist, I'm not an artist, but it feels to me like they're just such different gears from one another. You know, that comics and plays and photography and music they're all art, but they're all just different. So different that how do you contain that all?
Well, I mean, as I said before, really, in a way, they're all the same. In a way, you're always given a similar problem. Here is a story, an idea, a feeling, a piece of information, something to communicate. How are we going to do that? And you have to find the most effective, most powerful, most affecting way of doing that. And that's true of all of those, every media, of every piece of work that I've done. So that never changes. It's the changes between them that bring it to life to me, and that's what teaches me. That's where I get to learn things. I love learning how to do these things. So working with actors has taught me a lot about how to set a scene up in a comic. Just their intuition on how they would enter a scene, on what words they would use to start. Maybe not the first ones I wrote. Maybe they would break into the conversation further down the page because that felt more right, more natural for them. Yeah. All of those lessons that I've learned from the actors that I've worked with and those film environments, I've fed into the comics that I've been doing. If you look at the way the scenes are set up in Raptor, for me, they feel like actors in a space. And I've taken that directly from my film work. So they speak to each other all the time. And, you know, a lot of the stuff that I've learnt, taking photographs, working with light, making physical compositions in illustration, I've brought those lessons to composing frames in film or composing images for theatre or whatever. So they speak to each other all the time. And they all have their own qualities, and they can all offer lessons to each other.
Yeah, that makes a tremendous amount of sense to me. I guess I'm thinking more in terms of just sort of the technical aspects of it, right? So, like in terms of photography, there's a certain amount of focus that you have to have. You have to understand how the shapes, but that's a different set of tasks in a comics page. I think it is, at least. Is it not? I mean, if it's not, that's fine. But from my layman point of view, they seem so different, right? That how shape and time work are different in different mediums. That's true to a degree. And there are certainly technical challenges in each one that you have to master. You have to get your head around. But those are only really, they're little technical lessons. You can learn to be I watched a documentary about Orson Welles yesterday, and he was talking about going on the set of Citizen Kane for the first time, and his cinematographer, whose name I should know and has just left my head, but he said he wanted to make the film with Orson Welles because he had not made a film before. He wanted to work with somebody who would come at it with such fresh eyes and such a fresh vision. And he said, being a cinematographer is highly technical. The camera is a highly technical device, but I can teach you everything you need to know about the basics of what I do in my job as a cinematographer in 10 minutes. And any good, really good technician can teach you the basics of the technical side of a particular medium pretty quickly. They're just technical lessons. It's what you do with that information that is right. And that's where you try and bring your own vision, your own way of working with it. Yeah. I'm honestly not sure that I'm really answering your question, but no, I mean, I'm also, whenever I ask these questions, I'm never sure that I know what the question is either. You're making it sound like a huge, extraordinary thing to do, to keep all of these things in your head. My God, but they're really not. It's really not that much. Okay. There's a few technical things you have to keep in mind, and it's amazing how similar they are actually across the medium. But what I'm most interested in is communicating ideas, and that never changes. That's where I spend most of my time. Yeah. Yeah, no, I can see that. So let's talk about Raptor. Let's talk about the latest a bit. Where did your initial ideas for this come from? I've been making notes. I've been reading a lot of books there's a wonderful strain of new
nature writers out there. They're often walkers, hikers, mountaineers. They're often writing about journeys. And they're often writing both in the sheer reverie of language, trying to rediscover old words, recreate the language to express their feelings about the natural world, describe the natural world. Just a sort of revelry of language, but also a deeply political side to it, where they're trying to make sure that there's a very sinister aspect to a lot of planning in England. I'm sure it's around the world, where areas of land are dismissed as scrub, just grayed out scrub. And it's much more than that. Hugely important natural environments for animals, insects, birds, or whatever are just being wiped out because that land is considered wasteland scrub. And they are reclaiming the subtleties of language, of how to describe all of these different interactions, ecological interactions, as a way of saying, no, it's much more important than that. You can't dismiss this as grayed out scrub. So I'm really interested in that at the moment as well. So I was making notes on that. God knows where that's going to go. And then I got interested in there's a strain of English horror writing. It's barely horror. It's sort of mystery, uncanny writing of the late 19th century, early 20th century. A writer called Arthur Machen in particular, who wrote The Great God Pan and various other books. And I was kind of interested in that strain of writing. It crops up in television films in England in the 70s, things that I grew up with as a kid. Certain films that were made around that time. Sort of rural horror, I suppose you'd call it. And so I'd made notes about Arthur Machen, having read his diaries about this particular moment in his life when his wife died, and young wife died of cancer. And more than ever, he wanted there to be some other realm, something bigger than just our world. And he went to extraordinary lengths, I think, to try and satisfy this desire to prove that this other world existed. And you read these letters and you're filled with a sense that this is just a man in grief who desperately wants to see his wife again. Mm-hmm. So that was a note in a book. And then there was an opportunity to do a book, a book by an established character, and I made notes on that and started to write that. But that didn't happen, and it seemed obvious that I needed to sort of sweep all these things into something that was much more personal and something that would mean something to me rather than just take on somebody else's character. Yeah. And I kind of liked the idea of having a character that I could explore many different things with. And the theme that seemed important to me then and now is somebody trapped, the sense of being trapped between worlds, between fact and fiction, reality and fantasy, between, in the end, literally the state of being human and the state of being wild, a bird of prey. And I thought that, and since so many of the arguments that are going on at the moment culturally are so polarized, it seemed to be a way I could talk about many of the things that I was really interested in, politically, socially, all sorts of things, creatively. Mm-hmm. If I was trapped in this state between two opposites and trying to build bridges, find some way through those two realms. Yeah. So there we go. So those were all my notes, and I sort of swept them all up and started to map out a story. And as soon as I had a few notes of it, I thought it could be an interesting book.
Yeah, well, yeah, that does. So again, in a case like this, are you able just to go to a publisher and go, I want to do something, I'm just going to do it, or do you start the work? I mean, is there an acceptance process that you have to pitch? I don't know what it's like for you, Dave, because it seems like you're anybody should be honored to work with you. So, you know.
Well, again, I can't take anything for granted. I have a wonderful place at Dark Horse, a great editor in Dan Chabon, and I've always got on really well with Mike Richardson. Every time I go to Comic-Con, I see him.
Yeah.
And he's been hugely supportive and enthusiastic for the books that we've done done there. And so I think I technically have to pitch, but basically it comes down to just me writing what I want to do on a single sheet of A4 or a short email, and say, this is what I really fancy doing. What do you think? And they generally, you see, the difference is they behave as a publisher,
right?
And I've now worked with several other publishers, Walker Books and Bloomsbury Press and people, and it's a very different system from working at DC Comics, which I never really felt was a publisher. Right. They're a trademark holder, and they assign you a job.
Right.
Whereas when I work at a publisher, we finish it, and we have a launch party, and at the launch party they say, "Great, what do you want to do next?" Yeah. There's that inquiry and that feeling that you're developing a body of work together. And they're interested in you as a creative person.
Yep.
So I think so long as I don't abuse it too much, and give them ludicrously uncommercial, crazy, abstract things. I think so long as we can, it generally works for us. And fortunately, unlike the film industry, it doesn't involve vast amounts of money. It just involves a small amount of money, or a manageable amount of money in publishing them. I hope that I've got a good place there that I can rely on, that I can bring these projects to. So, the Black Dog was the previous one to Raptor. That was an unusual one because it was a commission from a foundation creating work to memorialize the First World War, and they just wanted me to pitch anything to do with the First World War. So that was where I decided to zero in on Paul Nash, and I did that book, and then I could just take that project to Dark Horse and say, "This is what we're doing. It's commissioned already. Will you publish the final book?" And they were great with that, and we did well. We did well with that one. Yeah. And so I'm hoping Raptor, the short, the pictures that tick books that we've done together. Each time I'm just going, even the short films collection that they did, which I thought was a real punt for them. They've been really behind me, and I think they feel that in the long term, some will do really well, some will do okay, but in the long term, they will have supported my work, and I'll feel like I have a home. Yeah.
So you're not even pitching books at different places, right? You're just, sounds to me like I'm a Dark Horse, and that's what's happening now.
I think for these kinds of books, yes, that's the case. The children's books that I've been doing elsewhere, partly because it's better to be with a children's book publisher, or the author I'm working with is with that publisher. I've done other books with other publishers, and I may well do other books with other publishers. I've got a graphic novel that I'm working on at the moment, and that was commissioned by another publisher. The way it turned out, it was with another publisher. So, I'm not under some sort of weird exclusive deal.
Oh, sure.
But But it's
nice to have a home, I guess, is what I was saying.
Well, I so value the trust that they've shown me in producing these books. Quite esoteric books, I think, and they've gone with it. I'm delighted to stay with it.
Yeah. So again, let's sort of go to the blank page of Raptor. You've got to start at page 1. What do you do? Are you sketching out for yourself? Are you how does it work?
Well, I have a book usually for each project. This is my Black Dog book. This is the Raptor book. It's called Stockholm for most of its life, so it's got Stockholm on the front. So this is just full of my notes to myself. Really breaking. Can you see that? Breaking down pages. Often
Very small, yeah. Super thumbnails, yeah.
Super thumbnails, but reworking it. So this is a reworked version of stuff that's already been reworked.
Yeah.
As it evolves.
Yeah.
So that all just gets noted down. It all gets moved around. Some of these pages have been photocopied and stuck earlier because I rejigged it.
Yeah.
And so it gets developed that way. Meanwhile, I'm sort of drawing characters and working out how they might look. Deciding how I'm going to illustrate it. Is it going to be painted? Is it going to be penciled, drawn? Is it going to be realistic? Is it going to be very expressive? All of these things slowly evolve, and then there reaches a point where I can't put it off any longer. I am actually going to have to start drawing something. So then I just start drawing, and these I was doing pencil drawings at the time, so I was doing these pencil drawings.
Yeah.
And so I was having such a good time just starting the drawing on the page and not knowing whether it would continue further left or up or down, or it's just a drawing. I ended up doing almost all the book in single panels.
Interesting.
Single drawings like this.
And
then on the back, I put it on a light box and do another pass. With a plate that I print in blue or buff or something like that, as a sort of second color. So technically that's how it was done. Some of the pages were done more like pages, but almost I've got them here. I've got some here. I mean, there's all kinds of bits and bobs, just drawings. And I love drawing in pubs and restaurants and things, so I would always take a pad along and I'd do panels in the pub. Some of them are ink drawings. Like that, larger page with two images on. That whole spread is one big drawing there.
Wow, nice.
So that's that, and then the painted panels. There were sequences that I thought should be obviously not of this world. They're dreams, they're imaginings, and so they were painted. And I was heading off doing much more sort of abstract work at the time, so they became these sort of very sort of abstracted figures as just painted pieces, and then it all just gets compiled. So this is unlike other books that I've done, certainly unlike Cages and unlike most of Black Dog. This was all done in fragments and all scanned and pieced together in the computer and rejigged and reworked. And I kept on redrawing things for some reason. I've got so many drawings of these characters, and I just didn't like these drawings in the end. I did the second pass on them and everything, and scanned them, and I just didn't like them. So I almost drew the book twice because I just couldn't quite get the drawings that I liked. So it took a while.
Wow. So it almost sounds like the assembling part of the process is as long as the drawing part of the process, or does it go faster in the assembling?
It does go faster in the assembling, but the assembling is lovely and loose because you've got lots of different elements and you can sort of push them around the page and just throw them down and see if interesting things happen. It meant that, the final pages often don't look a lot like my thumbnails because I had such fun moving them around and finding ways of one image playing off another that I had not thought about before. But just the fact that you can push them around the screen so easily and they're all these different fragments, it invites you to play really and explore the pages much more. Yeah,
and it a lot of the book is on a grid, and I assume that's because you're doing it as panels. Does that limit you? Does that make it easier? I'm thinking particularly in terms of, how the eye flows on a page, or where the page turn is, or those kinds of things.
Sorry, I just reached back to grab a copy so I can see. I can see. What was the gist of the question again?
Well, it was sort of that it's the book is largely on a grid. Seems like.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. It strikes me that's the nature of when you're assembling panels, right? But a lot of comics work is not as It's more composing the page as a page rather than as panels. Boy, I'm not asking that question right at all. I don't even know what the question is.
Well, I think that within each panel there's a lot of play for me. It may not show it in the final thing, but I can see where I've started one thing and pushed it into something else, and I've tried to leave it as open and fluid and improvisational and fun for me as possible. But what's most important is the storytelling.
Yeah.
And so in the end, they have to serve the story. They can't just be a bunch of pretty pictures and haven't I had a nice time making it. They have to tell the story. And so very often, I mean, there's quite a bit of conversation in this book. Yeah. And conversations feel like they need a tick to me, and that tick is a grid of some kind. And if the composition of the whole page overwhelms the ticking nature of the conversation running through the page, I think that's probably an imbalance. I don't think that's really working. There are some illustrators that I think do that. That's the nature of their work, and some of it I really love. But to tell this kind of story with people, characters that I want you to get to know how they move and talk and speak and how they express themselves, I want you to be in the tick of the storytelling.
Yeah. So are you really considering each page as a unit by itself, or are you thinking in terms of, say, odds, evens? You know, like where the page break is and where the page turn is?
Yeah, all of those things. It's really important where the page breaks are. I tend to like scenes to end on the double page spread, then you turn the page and you're into a new scene. Yeah. I don't really like cutting into the middle of a scene halfway through a page. It just doesn't feel right to me. I like it when you open the page and there's a sense. It can be a sense of impact, it can be a sense of balance, it can be a sense of an atmosphere. The colors all have are working with each other to create a certain atmosphere. I like that feeling, and then you go into the page and read it. So yeah, all of these things are like, you know, the fire. When you turn the page and you're in the middle of the street with the fire, that's something. All of these things are the elements that you play with when making one of these books, and you know, that's why they take a while, because you've got to try and balance all the elements. And how much editorial conversation or back and forth is there? Is Chabon coming to you with, hey, this would work better if you did it this way, or is it just, man, you're great, we're gonna let you do whatever the hell you want? Well, I don't know about that, but they are just letting me do my book.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like in DC's case where they've given you an assignment and expect to under normal circumstances to have an input into that. This is my book, and so I'm sure Dan would be the first person to say, if he read something and he couldn't understand what I'd done, he would say, can you just explain what that is, to make sure that I'm missing something, or maybe you hadn't thought about it. I'm sure he would say that. So far, I don't think we've had any problems.
Yeah.
And we have a fantastic technical team there on the print department and proofreading department, and they pick me up on all sorts of bits and bobs. But just the nature of the book and the way I want to tell my stories, they seem just totally supportive of that, really.
Yeah. When you compose pages in Photoshop, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Is there any significant difference between how it appears on your screen versus how it prints?
Almost none. I've been working with a computer now for so long and calibrated it to my eye so precisely. I mean, that's the reason why, one of the reasons why I love using Photoshop at the end of the day, is because it gives you such control over the page, over the density of the inks, over the saturation of the colors, over the way everything works, the way the type works. I've found this way of doing sort of 80% white balloon, so you just get a sense of the image underneath the balloon, and a very particular font that I feel is absolutely right for my tone of voice. And you know, that's the way I like it, and that's the way I'm going to continue to do that.
Yeah. Is this font? Is it commercial font?
It's a commercial font.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's a commercial font, but there's just something about its. It's very fun. It's fun. It's very hard to find another font that does the same thing, even though it looks so innocuous. It looks so ordinary. But I have not been able to find another font that has the same tone of voice as this one.
I wish I was a better artist, because I feel like I have questions about the art itself, but I don't know how to ask them. Just in terms of the saturation of the color, and it's different tonally than almost anything that I've seen.
Well, that's good. Hopefully in a good way.
No, in a very good way. No, in an excellent way. But I wonder how much time sort of the color part of it takes versus the line art, because it seems to me, and again, tell me that you're wrong, but your line art is loose and it's gestural, and it, right, like you're not really, it feels to me, at least looking at it, that you're not obsessing about like any individual panel, what it looks like, but the color, it almost feels like something that is obsessed by, to get the balance just right. Did that say anything? I don't. Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of obsessed with the way each panel looks.
Okay.
But I've developed a very sort of anti-slick streak. I don't like very, very slick drawing and inking anymore. I think I probably liked that as a kid a lot. Yeah. And I think in art school I liked it, and some of my tutors tried to dissuade me from being obsessed with surface technique. But the older I've got, the less it impresses me, and actually starts to annoy me, that sort of love of slick. Yeah. So I like drawings that have a roughness to them and a sense of fight about them, that I'm trying to find the line. I love that in a drawing. That's what I think is a good drawing. When I see that, I see the hand making those lines and trying to express something, trying to fight to find it. And I rarely see that in comic book drawing, and I don't see it much in illustration. You see it in, you know, the really great draftsmen, you know, the Egon Schilles of this world. Yeah. So, you know, I want to try and find that quality somehow, try and get that quality into the drawings that I'm doing. But I'm quite obsessed with making sure that the panel is right. On the color, I'm not very happy with using color. I don't like just coloring things in their right colors. I'd rather them just be left black and white, really. And I'd rather and if there's going to be color, then I really want the color to have a purpose and to be doing a job. So it's there to punch through at a crucial point, to make a point. It's there to create an atmosphere. I mean, you'll see on the conversational pages with Arthur and what's his name, there's barely any color there. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to say that they're in color. There's a sort of there's a bit of a brown tone and a bit of a blue tone, but that's not naturalistic coloring. I have not colored in anybody's skin tone. I haven't colored anything in the room a specific color. It's there just to create a feeling, an atmosphere. It looks slightly old-fashioned. These characters are speaking in the late 19th century, so it has a little bit of that sort of old paper feel to it. But the points at where color really bursts through are things like the fire, things like the dreams, those hard colors. You know, that's when the colors really explode. Yeah. And because they only do it on a couple of pages, I hope the reader will have a sense of, well, there must be a reason for that. I want, you know, this has gone bonkers for a reason.
But even in the conversational pages, right? There's the color. You're using color for depth, I think.
Yes.
Right. That, you know, where things are in the foreground, what's in the background, and it's an interesting technique that I don't think that I've really seen a lot of people use it that way.
Yeah. So if there's any color there, it's got to be doing a job, and so it's doing a tonal job there. It's pulling, it's allowing some things in the foreground to come forward and other things to move back. And I'm putting a flat blue sometimes over the background just to separate it from the character a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, this is really basic picture making stuff.
Okay.
But again, you know, you don't see it so much in regular comic book drawing, so maybe that's why it looks slightly unusual.
Very much so. Is there going to be more? Is this? Are you coming back to these characters?
Well, I like the idea of doing another, but I would come back to the main character, to Sokol.
Yeah.
I wouldn't. I think the idea is that he represents that sort of realm of creativity, that sort of feeling that I wonder where ideas come from, where ideas reside, where the imagination exists in the universe. You know, I'm an absolute strict rationalist on all this stuff. I don't believe in any supernatural world or any fairy stuff. But I do make my living doing something that I fundamentally don't quite understand. I do get ideas and I don't know where they come from. It absolutely it is, I suppose technically it's two things rubbing together and sparking a third thing, but you're not really aware of the mechanics of it. You just know that you suddenly got an idea and I'm not in control of it. And that's slightly scary. So all of those questions I think are interesting. And he sort of represents a character living in that world that we touch occasionally. Yeah. And so he could pop up and appear in the consciousness of a Neanderthal man doing cave paintings, or somebody in the future, or a science fiction author, or 12th century monk, or who knows. That conversation between the creative person in turmoil, trying to work something out, or in a crisis in their life, and this feeling of, isn't there more to life than this? Isn't there more out there? Isn't there something else? That conversation. I think that's what these books will end up being about, and that's what this character represents. So I'd go back to him, the Sokol character, the raptor.
Yeah. Well, I mean, particularly because it's a so-called graphic novel, it made me think that you've got a series of these already figured out. Yeah,
I did put that there too. A bit of a tease.
Yeah. Can I ask you about the cover? Why is the tone of the cover so different than the inside of the book?
Oh, well, I don't know. I didn't think it was massively different from the inside of the book.
But it's black, and it's, it's very dark, and whereas there's a lot of light in the book. Yeah.
I suppose so. I haven't really thought about it. I always see the cover. I mean, just going back to doing the Sandman covers and everything, I always tend to see the cover as a sort of proscenium arch or lens or curtains opening, and then you enter the story through the experience of being attracted to in the shop, the cover, and picking it up and buying it. The cover is that sort of opening note in the piece of music.
Yeah.
And so I suppose turning the lights down to black and saying, right, now we're going to go into this world, is maybe something of what I was trying to do.
Okay. Yeah, very good.
There we go. I've post-rationalized that argument a little bit for myself, but I think that was fair enough.
Yeah. I would, I don't know that it pops off the rack this time, though, because I think tone, like especially you look at the background, the books in the background behind me, it's kind of just a wall of black in a way,
I get, you put it like that, it was a terrible mistake. I promise not to do it again.
Well, it wasn't what I was trying to get at, man. That's not what I was trying to get at. Jordan, was there a question, or you put the sign out? It's been asked. Okay, great. Well, cool. Then let's go to the two final questions.
Okay.
One's super easy. Is there anything coming up that we don't know about yet that you would like to plug? For us to keep an eye out for, opportunity to just plug any gosh darn thing you'd like to plug.
Okay, well, I'll very quickly just show you a couple of things. I've been illustrating a lot of books recently, really loving illustrating all sorts of books. This is one that I did recently of Crime and Punishment.
Oh, nice.
Dostoevsky. Great cover design. Oh, that sounds really big-headed. Sorry, I did. But I was really happy with it. So, look at the eyes. You see. So that's that one. Profusely illustrated, and I've done several other books since, and I'm working on several other books now. So I'm doing a lot of illustrated books. I'm doing.
When you do illustrated books, are you going back and rereading the book all the way through, or?
No, I have to.
Yeah.
I have to read it closely and make notes as I'm going through. And I've just finished a huge trilogy for folio books, and I mean that I was contracted to do 25 illustrations for that, and I ended up doing 140. Wow. It turned into an absolute monster. So that's been great. I'm still love traveling and not so much traveling in the last couple of years, and probably not next year, but hopefully soon again, and making these little travel books of drawings. This is Venice. Nice. Drawings in Venice, and this is Prague. And then I work a lot. This is something that you may not know. I've been working for the last 15 years with an amazing 3-star Michelin chef called Heston Blumenthal. I've done murals for his restaurants. I've done menus. I'm the head of story at the restaurant in Bray, where we develop a narrative to go along with the menu. And I've been doing books with him. So this is a book that I've done with him. I've done 2 already, and we're working on a 3rd. Again, they're vast tomes. Where are we? Profusely illustrated with my illustrations throughout. Various things going on there. So I'm still working with Heston, and that's Heston Blumenthal, and we're developing more books, children's books, various other things. And I'm still doing comics. I still love doing comics. I'm working on a new book that would be a new book for Dark Horse. It will be a completely non-genre, contemporary book about. This has been such a weird time these last couple of years, and it's not going to be a COVID book. It's not going to be a lockdown book. Right. But it is going to try and deal with a lot of arguments and ideas and feelings that have come up from me personally, and also with friends, and anxieties particularly about the world. So I want to do something about that, about truth.
Your prolificness blows me away. How do you find the hours in the day to do all of these things, man?
Well, since we left the EU, I keep hoping we'll go back to those 32-hour days we used to have then. But I'm sure it's not going to happen. But so I don't know. Things get done. Everything takes far longer and is much slower than I would like it to be. But things happen.
It impresses the heck out of me. All right. Well, so the final question, as it were. We have a lot of people who watch this series who want to make comics of their own, who don't necessarily know where to start or what to do. If there was a piece of advice that you could give someone who wants to make comics, it can be technical, it can be philosophical, it can be emotional, it can be kind of anywhere you want it to be. What would that piece of advice be?
That's very difficult because it just varies so much from person to person. We all have our own ambitions and strengths, and so it's very hard to come up with one piece of advice that would just fit everybody. I think the first thing to say is that I think that comics are going through an absolute golden age at the moment. I've never known a time historically where there have been more exciting books published more frequently, and I think the fact that we're able to now see and read voices from around the world with no nostalgic baggage. They just love the medium and are telling their stories from cultures and countries and circumstances around the world. I think it's an absolute golden age. And so I suppose my hope, although I understand that there are plenty of people who want to work in the mainstream of comics, my hope would be that people would want to contribute to that world of comics.
Yeah.
And that much more expansive view of what comics can be. In which case, I think they really need to decide who they are, what they have to say, and the nature of the piece of work that they want to create. And the great thing about a comic rather than a film or another huge collaborative piece is that you can just start tomorrow and do it.
Yeah.
You can start page one and just start making it. So I think that's the most important thing, to give your own. I know everybody has to make a living, and there's bound to be a degree of compromise, especially when you're starting, taking on a work that maybe wouldn't be your first choice. But if you have to prioritize your own voice and what you want to do, and give that time, and make sure that work gets done, and then you have something to show. And the great thing about living in the internet's got many downsides, but the one good side is it does connect you with so many people and with a potential audience. So they're out there. You just have to find them.
Yeah, very much so. I love that. I love that answer. I love that answer. I love this book. Dave McKEAN, I love you. I'm in awe of you, at your talent and your passion, which just comes through on every page. You're just raw artistry. I thank you, sir, for doing the thing that you do, and I hope you continue to do it for many, many decades to come, because you're the kind of artist that I love supporting in the store, and I love supporting with what we're doing here. So thank you. For little housekeeping for the show, put me back in one shot, Jordan. As I said, if you're sitting at home, you don't have anything to read, you don't know what to do, go get Raptor. It is gorgeous. It is smart. It is thoughtful. It has a dark cover, but the insides are beautiful. Next month's book is The Good Asian. The trade hasn't come out yet. We're getting it on Wednesday, and we'll be bringing it in. But so this is next month's book, and we'll be interviewing Pornsak Pishashot, which I'm sure I pronounced his name wrong, and Alexander Tefenge. I'm sure I pronounced his name wrong as well, but we'll fix that for next week. So that's next week's adult club. The kids club this month is Ted Naphy's Witch for Hire. So that's like 3 weeks from now, we're going to be doing that. And then our classic selection this month is Paul Pope's Heavy Liquid. So we'll be talking to Paul Pope later in the month. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Jordan for running the show. I want to thank Kat and Zoe, my staff, for keeping the store running. I want to thank, who else do I want to thank, Jordan? What did I forget? That's it. Well, and I want to thank Dave, and I want to thank all the members of the club, too, that let us do this. But I want to thank Dave and creators like him who I would not have a life if it wasn't for this kind of thing. So thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you very much, Brian. It's lovely to talk to you.
Lovely to talk to you as well. We'll see you next time.
Cheers.